there is a deeply held religious faith among most doctors and certainly medical boards and societies that vaccines are good, that we must accept them. And anybody who challenges the religion of vaccines must be destroyed.
All right. Welcome back to the Rebecca Weiss Podcast. I am excited today because I am joined with two experts here. But before we get into it, I want you to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell. It helps our episodes. It helps get these important messages out. And I'm joined here today with Dr. Peter McCullough and his colleague, Nick, who's an epidemiologist. And you guys work together. So tell me about that, what you guys are doing at the McCullough Institute.
Well, let me tell you what, through the pandemic, we've learned there's a couple really kind of hot professions out there. And one of the hottest is epidemiology.
That's true.
And so I recruited Nick Hulscher from the University of Michigan. I went to the University of Michigan decades ago, and I trained in epidemiology. And Nick just graduated. So Nick, welcome to the program.
Yes. Well, thanks for having me, of course. And I want to say one thing. At University of Michigan, so I was going there during the height of the pandemic, right? So basically, I asked every single professor, can I have an internship with you? I kind of want to investigate vaccine safety. And so all of my professors said no, right? They said no. So I was like, you know what? I've been following Dr. McCullough for about a year. And, I was like, why don't I just email him? So I emailed him, and he responds in 5 minutes with an entire study idea. And that study idea was a systematic review of autopsy findings in deaths after COVID-19 vaccination. Since then, we've been working together, and we've been busting out the studies here at the McCullough Foundation. We've actually published over 20 scientific peer-reviewed papers now, all published exposing the harms of the mRNA injections.
And so he's doing like the research and publishing that information and helping with all that, because that's a lot to sift through.
It's vital. That's what our Center for Disease Control should be doing. Now, epidemiology, so we can get the definition out there, is the study of the distribution and determinants of disease. Distribution is, why do some people get problems and other people don't? And then determinants is, what are these risk factors? Each one of us is different. So epidemiology is fundamental to medicine. Our public health agencies have many people who are trained like Nick and I in this area, but they have not been on duty during this time of great controversy.
Wow. Okay, well, you have a new book out, Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. What brought you to write this book? Because you've been on quite a journey. Because I remember you a couple years ago when you're coming through having concerns with COVID, and you are a cardiologist, for those who don't know that, and you are peer-reviewed and published and studied, so you are very much celebrated in the medical community. But you've been on quite a journey from like 5 years ago to now. So tell us about that.
Boy, my wife keeps asking, what happened? But, I'm board certified as an internist and cardiologist. I'm trained in epidemiology and, formerly was full professor of medicine, traveled the world lecturing, made many contributions to my field in heart and kidney disease, had over 1,000 peer-reviewed, published communications, 700 listings in the National Library of Medicine. Typical professor of medicine that you have at graduate school, Nick, has 25. So I was the endowed lecturer in 2 divisions at Harvard in 2019. Everyone knew me. Been in the FDA multiple times, was on National Institutes of Health oversight panels. But when the COVID-19 vaccine crisis unfolded, and in 2021, when we saw the rollout of mass genetic vaccines that had never been used before, coding for the lethal part of the virus, the spike protein, and we saw scores of people getting sick, sadly some dying from the vaccine. The vaccine looked worse than the infection. I said, something's wrong. We need to examine this zealotry that we are seeing with vaccines.
But then you evolved from noticing problems with the COVID vaccine to issues with other vaccines. And most doctors never really deeply look into the harms of vaccines or the history. And that's really where this book was birthed out of. You cover everything. I was looking at the chapters. You cover like every vaccine, the history. I mean, this is going to be such a resource for people.
Yes.
Because so much of this is not talked about. When other people talk about vaccines, it's this very squeaky clean image and it's the science, it's proven the science, trust the science. We heard that a million times while going through COVID. And you really kind of shadow that perfect image and with the truth.
With the truth, and it's an historical examination of it. But let me just say, whether it's medical school or graduate school, the whole world of vaccinology is typically not presented. Nick, did you have anything in graduate school on vaccines?
No. In fact, the only thing I'll always remember this one slide in our virology class, right? And the only thing they told us about vaccine safety was that the spike protein was good for you. That's where they're at, unfortunately.
The most lethal part of the coronavirus is not good for you. In fact, it's a very bad thing. And but what we did is we went back to the beginning and we just examined what happened. So most people credit vaccinology starting with Edward Jenner, who's in Gloucester, England, late 18th century. But we saw dabblings in Africa as well as in modern day Turkey, Istanbul, Constantinople back in the day. And we had to start somewhere. We started 1721. Cotton Mather, who's a Puritan minister in Boston, probably the most notable intellectual of his day. Cotton Mather has several children die of measles. So he actually, has this very personal fear of infectious diseases. He takes up with Dr. Boylston and begins experimenting with what's called variolation. Variolation is taking a smallpox pustule from one child, lancing it with a scalpel, taking some of the pus, and then lancinating a normal child and putting the pus in that cut. That's called variolation. Because remember, needles weren't developed back then. Needles weren't developed early on, so it was done by scalpel. And the idea is if you can give a little bit of smallpox to somebody, maybe you can protect them from getting the full-blown smallpox. Back then, they didn't know what even caused smallpox. They had no idea that it was an infectious disease. Viruses weren't even defined back then. But this took off. And the reason why I mentioned Cotton Mather is Cotton Mather declares that this is a gift from God, that this has a godlike nature to it to go through this process. This is very early on, 1721, Boston, Massachusetts. Now, Cotton Mather, notably, is also an advisor to the judges in the Salem witchcraft trials.
Really?
So he believed in witches. He also believed that vaccines were gifts from God. That's how this whole thing starts. And we work our way through Edward Jenner, Louis Pasteur making bold claims, not revealing his notes. Like, what? Like, people say, Louis Pasteur says, well, I have a fowl cholera vaccine. We'll say, well, where's the evidence that it works? Well, I'll show you later. And Pasteur did do some good things, pasteurization. He was the first to try a rabies vaccine. But the bottom line is it was fraudulent concealment. It comes out in the 1960s that he didn't do nearly what he said he did. He was stealing from others. And this just keeps going and going and going. We get to the modern vaccine era, and we realize that even the polio vaccines early on were contaminated. They were contaminated with live polio virus. So there was a whole batch of the injectable polio vaccines. It's called the Cutter incident. The polio virus was not dead. So people got injected with this, and sadly, children got polio from the vaccine.
And they pulled it off the market.
And they pulled it off the market. It was Cutter Labs that made it. But listen, this whole field of vaccines has had some bad things. Then the polio vaccines in another incident are found to be contaminated with simian virus 40, SV40 fragments. These are known cancer-promoting DNA fragments. It's relevant to me since I was a child at the time during the period of time when these were given out. Mm-hmm. And the Institute of Medicine did a big report on this and said, yes, they were contaminated. We don't know how much cancer is going to develop in people like me later on from these polio shots.
Really? just one of the many things that you find out way later and you wonder, why did they not tell us this sooner? What was, a lot of people claim when people talk about vaccines, polio is a big topic. And they always say, well, look, we eradicated polio through vaccines. What would your response to that be?
Polio is very interesting because you really can't find evidence of it back in the 15th, 16th, 17th century. If polio was around, how come people weren't paralyzed back then? It's so interesting. And so my co-author, John Leake, through his investigative work, believes that polio, believe it or not, is probably, it was a problem of cleanliness.
Yeah.
That we all actually were, as little babies, exposed to polio through diapers and through water and contaminated water and all this. And it wasn't until the modern era of cleanliness in the 40s and 50s and 60s when we started to get modern sanitation, the little babies weren't exposed to it anymore. And sure enough, when you're 6, 7, or 8 and you go swimming at a public beach, you can get exposed to polio potentially there or later on in school, that in fact children could contract polio. Now, the initial polio vaccines, the sugar cube, the oral polio vaccines, they did provide some protection from invasive polio, but they contributed more polio virus to the water supply. I remember taking those as a kid. So then we had to reverse course and say, no, let's get rid of those. Let's actually use injectable polio vaccines. So I got more of those as a kid. So sure, polio did reduce the case count of cases of polio, no doubt about it. The vaccines did work, which is wonderful. But we haven't had polio in the water supply now for decades in the Western Hemisphere. So I don't know if the polio vaccine protected me or anyone else because we're not exposed to it anymore. So it brings up an important point. With vaccines, when there's side effects, they're real because you can count and measure the side effects. The benefit of a vaccine per individual is theoretical. Because if I never came in contact with polio, the vaccine couldn't have done me any good. And you never know if you're going to come in contact with something.
So that kind of leads me to my next question, which is a lot of people vaccinate their children and there's this societal pressure to vaccinate. Because like, for example, with measles, that's been something that a lot of people have been talking about lately. There's this, I'm on these mom groups online, and I remember in the city that I lived in, one of the moms posted, and there's like, oh, there's been a measles outbreak in our area. And then all the moms were angry at the anti-vaxxers saying that we're part of this problem. And so there's this notion that if you vaccinate, you prevent something like measles spreading, and it's the anti-vaxxers that are contributing to that problem. Is that true?
Yeah, well, the thing about the measles vaccine currently is, it can prevent infection to some degree. But, obviously what parents are concerned about is the safety of them. And is the safety, do the benefits outweigh the risks? And it appears with particularly the MMR vaccines that there are a lot of risks, right? And many have been uncovered. But one thing that has never really been tested, actually never, is currently children get about 72 doses from age 0 to 18, right, through the childhood vaccine schedule recommended by the CDC. Not one of these 72 doses were tested in combination, right? So really, we don't actually know the full safety profiles of this entire schedule. That's exactly why they're getting sued now by Dr. Paul Thomas and KP Stoller for actually never testing it in combination, never testing the safety, not issuing safety reports. HHS was not issuing safety reports they were supposed to as mandated by law. And so now we see, all of this is being exposed with the childhood vaccine schedule. And measles, there's been a lot of fear-mongering right, in the media we see. But we have to remember there's hundreds of thousands of measles cases in Europe, right? I mean,
in 1 year, the United States, they made a big deal because I think we hit 2,000 cases this year.
Yeah.
Worldwide, 600,000 cases in the world. And, in a report from the WHO, just in Europe alone, I think there was 250,000 cases. There were roughly 36 deaths, not a single one they could confirm being due to measles. Because remember, kids can get sick from measles but end up dying of a bacterial infection or dying of some other complication. And measles is treatable. There are protocols where, for instance, immunoglobulin is given to contacts. That's available. Using vitamin A in a protocol in randomized trials reduces the risk of death. And then secondary antibiotics and corticosteroids. We've put this all out on Focal Points. So go to Substack, subscribe to Focal Points. You'll get all the citations Nick and I are disclosing today. But the point is, whether someone takes a measles vaccine or not, is their own personal choice. And we know Dr. Ben Edwards. He went to Baylor, as I did, just south of here. Ben was out in West Texas taking care of the Mennonites who are getting measles. The Mennonites are not taking vaccines. They never have taken vaccines. And you know what? Ben, like me, he took all the measles shots. Guess what? He got measles.
Really?
Yeah, so you can't make this up. So when I was a kid, at age 2, I got a measles shot. Back then, it was a single measles shot. So then I go to medical school here in Dallas. And they said, well, in order to matriculate, you have to get a blood test, see if you have any immunity to measles. I get my blood test. No immunity. So then I get another measles shot. Okay. Then now I'm a fellow years later and says, well, we need to have another check on your measles immunity. No immunity. So at that time, they have available is the MMR. So at age 28, I get 2 MMR vaccines. I'm just trying to follow the rules, right? But the point is, I've been vaccinated 4 times for measles. I still don't have any immunity. I guarantee if I was out there in West Texas and some kid with measles, was in my exam room, I would get measles. The CDC is deceptively reporting things. If you go on the measles outbreak website, the CDC will say 95% of people who have contracted measles in U.S. outbreaks are unvaccinated or vaccine status unknown. Wait a minute. The CDC, we're paying them to know somebody's vaccine status. They interview every single person. What do they mean unknown? You know what I'm suspicious of? Lots of people have taken the measles vaccine. They can't find their vaccine card. They said, yeah, I took the shots. CDC says, listen, if you can't prove it, it's unknown.
And one more thing I want to add. There's more deaths from the MMR vaccine reported to the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System than there are measles deaths in the past 20 years. We're actually working on a study right now on this. So yeah, just think of that. That's the risk-benefit profile we have here.
It doesn't look good. In fact, Stanford reported in the peer-reviewed literature a poor baby who takes the MMR vaccine. And remember, it's a live attenuated vaccine. When you get the measles shot, it's a live virus. Well, this baby had an immunocompromised situation that the doctors weren't aware of. The virus was in the baby's body. It invades the brain of the baby and kills the baby. Stanford publishes it as a measles vaccine death in the peer-reviewed literature. I would make the case as a doctor that nobody should face the risk of death with a vaccine. Vaccines should be purely elective, and they better be safe. They should not take a child's life, because otherwise the parents are better off going alone. And we now have multiple studies showing a healthy child born today is healthier if they go without any vaccines.
That's something that's been studied?
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that study?
Boston and colleagues, yeah.
Yep. Boston and colleagues, they looked at over about 40,000 Medicaid recipients, and they actually looked and saw how many. So in the groups, they looked at, okay, did you have 1 visit to the pediatrician? Did you have 10 plus visits? And they kind of stratified it by how many visits. Those with the most visits had the highest rates of autism, had the highest rates of neurodevelopment disorders, including tics, seizures, including ADHD, right? So in these large data sets, we're kind of seeing these safety signals of higher levels of neurodevelopmental disorders, but not only that, autoimmune disorders, asthma. CDC study actually reported higher risk of asthma in those who receive higher doses of aluminum-containing vaccines. So we're seeing all of these risks, and really, is it worth it at this point to inject a newborn baby, right?
Who's healthy. The key is if they're healthy. So in the Mawson paper, these are visits that Nick is talking about, visits to get vaccines. So 10% of Medicaid recipients in Florida, 10%, had no Medicaid visits for vaccines. The parents probably opted out of taking vaccines. those were the healthiest children. Paul Thomas examined 5,000 patients in his pediatric practice. Guess what? The kids who took no vaccines were the healthiest. And there's been studies in the Amish and others. It's clear in the modern day, going natural, I mean natural meaning no vaccines whatsoever, in a healthy child, the child is healthier.
I remember Dr. Paul Thomas, but he experienced a lot of pushback for conducting that study. That's why I wanted to ask about that, because I actually followed him on YouTube because he's a great pediatrician, just for tips and stuff. And then I remember him saying that he conducted this story. And didn't he almost get his license
It was.
revoked?
Now, this is before COVID. Paul Thomas, his license was stripped because he studied the safety of vaccines in his practice and published it.
And the question is, why?
It goes back to what we've outlined in our book. There is a deeply held religious faith among most doctors and certainly medical boards and societies that vaccines are good, that we must accept them. And anybody who challenges the religion of vaccines must be destroyed. And that's what happened to Paul Thomas.
What, from your research and your findings when writing this book, what made you come to the point where you say this is similar to a religion? Like these people, this is so deeply seated in people that it's like you made that connection.
Look at the iconography on the cover. This is a papal coin. This was issued by the Pope, Pope Francis. It's a 20-euro coin. It's a boy about to receive the body and blood of Jesus Christ. But instead of receiving the Eucharist, he's receiving a vaccine. The vaccine replaces the body and blood of Jesus Christ. It can't be any more clear than this. Vaccinology has become a competing religion to Christianity. And the Vatican in Rome is making that abundantly clear to us.
What were your first thoughts when you saw that coin?
I was astonished. And we had intelligence from New Zealand that, in fact, a large church had unfurled a banner that said, not even the blood of Jesus Christ can save you, get vaccinated.
Really?
Yes. And that churches were starting to adopt vaccines as a replacement for Jesus Christ. There's a clear competition going on.
Was there a reason why you included the DNA in the background?
Because the DNA, as Nick will tell you, is an important part to the story. And what have we found with the messenger RNA?
That's what I wanted to ask about.
Yeah, so we recently just uploaded a study to the preprint server. We were working in collaboration, McCullough Foundation and Neo7 Bioscience, a biotechnology company. And so this study's out there for everybody to read. Right now it's undergoing peer review. And what we've identified is severe transcriptomic chaos after mRNA injections in individuals who have been injured. So those who develop new onset cancers, those who have neurological, cardiovascular adverse events after the shots, we actually looked at their blood profiles, right? And we compared it to a control group blood profile, pre-COVID, pre-vaccine, right? So these were blood profiles uploaded to a server about a decade ago. And so in the mRNA injured, thousands of genes become dysregulated.
Really?
Yes.
It affects the genetics?
Yeah.
The genetic code?
Yes, because this modified mRNA gets into these ribosomes. It's not read correctly. It causes biochemical stress. And then it kind of shuts off what's called tumor suppressor genes, P53 and BRCA. These are supposed to suppress cancers. Those are turned off. So then that's why we see these turbo cancers in those individuals who develop.
Are those the people who get those like really aggressive cancers after the shot?
Yeah. And so that explains that. We have this transcriptomic chaos, and now we see what's called biochemical chaos or proteomic chaos. Proteomics is the proteins being produced by these genes are now defective, involving fibrin and amyloid. So we have these misfolded proteins now being produced in some individuals.
What does that cause?
That can cause, this story of these long kind of fibrous clots and some corpses
Oh, the
being
clots.
identified.
Well, two things, the the spike protein folds is amyloidogenic. Anything that's amyloid is rubbery. And that's the reason why the blood clots look big and rubbery. The other thing the amyloid does, or these folded proteins, gets in the brain and is related to dementia, Alzheimer's disease. Let me tell you what, with these COVID vaccines now, we are seeing, a panoply of problems, cardiovascular, neoplastic cancer, neurologic, thrombotic. It's a disaster. And as Nick points out, these are real life patients. One of them is my patient who developed a turbo cancer. He was generous enough to participate in research. The genes, his genetics in his body now are markedly abnormal. The gene expression pattern we're seeing in my patient is dramatically different than a normal person.
I'm just like, the reason why my mouth is like agape while talking about this is because I've done so much research in the Word. I've had guests where I've talked about this, but if you go into the Word of God, there is a fight over the DNA of mankind. And that's in the very beginning in the book of Genesis, where God basically tells the devil that there would be a battle between basically Adam's seed and him. And when you study this stuff, the weird thing is there's always there's like this thread of like this demonic attack against man's DNA. So the fact that this mRNA is affecting the DNA is alarming to me as a Christian.
You can find it. In fact, we cite Anthony Fauci's former boss, who is Francis Collins, head of the National Institutes of Health, who was one of the most arrogant people of all of science. He led the Human Genome Project. And his books that he writes, the titles are Learning the Language of God.
Oh my God.
So Francis Collins and Anthony Fauci essentially believed that they were taking the place of God. Remember when Anthony Fauci said, I represent science? Remember when he said that? Remember, science is a process. We all use this as doctors and scientists. The hubris involved. And in our book, we go back in history. We challenge people. Who was more arrogant, Louis Pasteur or Anthony Fauci? It's the same. The thing about history is it doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it rhymes. That you have a pattern that you can see emerging. And in the field of vaccinology, it's about fear of infectious diseases, bold, unsubstantiated claims, incredible arrogance, power, and money. And when they all come together, watch out. Late 18th century, parents like you would be put in jail if you didn't vaccinate your child against smallpox. Well, here we are, centuries later, and we lost our job. We were defunded, discredited. We were marginalized because we wouldn't take a genetic vaccine.
Which was something that had never been introduced to us before. Not tested, brand new. It's like, why would we make that risk, but we were going to be punished. And so I know so many people who got the shot because they didn't want to pay that price, and then they're paying the price now in their health.
Well, you didn't take it, right?
I didn't.
Nick, did you take it?
No.
Oh.
I didn't take it. Well, you know what? 19% of Americans, according to USA Facts, using C2C data, we didn't take the vaccine.
Only 19?
Only 19%. Now,
that's a lot of people.
Now 30% of people didn't take 2 shots, meaning they didn't get the full vaccination. A lot of people after 1 shot bowed out. But think about the converse of that. 70% of people became fully vaccinated for a period of time with COVID-19. 70% of people went for it. Now the CDC will not tell us how many people are taking vaccines. They will not. We have no idea who's taken 8 shots or 9 shots or what have you. The CDC is now basically completely opaque. They're just doing a survey asking people what their inclination is. But the house of cards is falling for this vaccine cartel, this biopharmaceutical complex. Recent paper in JAMA has indicated 60% of young parents now are not going to follow the vaccine schedule.
I think more people are more critical now, more than ever. And I have 2 questions that I want to ask, and I'm trying to figure out which direction I want to go. I think one of the things, Nick, that you were talking about is when you were doing research, you uncovered how a lot of these protocols and safety measures and things that should have been reported by like the CDC and the FDA did not happen. How did people like that get away with that? And why would they do that in the first place, you wonder?
Right. So with these mRNA vaccines, and they're actually not vaccines, they're gene transfer platforms, they did get away with this. If we look in the past, like we talked about earlier, the Qatar polio vaccine incident, 10, 20 deaths, they pull it off the market. The swine flu vaccine in the 70s, 20, 50 deaths, they get that off quick. Even recently, a few weeks ago, the chikungunya vaccine, they pulled that one off after 3 deaths. And so with the mRNA debacle, we're currently at, estimated around 500 to 600,000 American deaths.
That's crazy. And they're still giving that shot out.
There appears to be a love affair with messenger RNA, and it's deep-seated. Our government and governments all over the world have invested tens of billions of dollars in messenger RNA since 1985.
What?
So messenger RNA is completely different than all the vaccines. We've seen the estimated deaths after the COVID-19 vaccine, and by the way, this is worldwide. The U.S. numbers are concordant with all the other safety databases. Not a single country in the world has issued a safety review of the messenger RNA vaccines. Not a single country has opened the vials to inspect them for quantity, purity, and contaminants. And not a single country
Which is crazy.
No inspections?
That's crazy.
It's stunning.
Sorry, I was just like, they're injecting this into people. They mandated that.
They inspect baby formula. They inspect Tylenol. No inspections of the vaccines. No safety review. 5 years into this.
And they're still giving
People
it out.
are protesting on the street. Something is going on big, and the COVID vaccines have taken it to another level, and that's the reason why we wrote our book. Something I could not imagine that something like this could really happen, and vaccines administered over and over and over again. 8 or 9 shots and health deteriorating, every shot getting worse and worse, people getting sick. Now cancer rates skyrocketing, rates of heart disease skyrocketing. We're hearing about young people with cancer. Even Dr. Shion went on Tucker Carlson. He said he's got little teenage boys and girls with colon cancer. We've never heard of this. Never.
Also, young people dying from heart problems as well. That was so abnormal. A lot of strokes as well. I've seen that in young people, which is not normal.
But what you're seeing is this societal normalization of this. So, for instance, we captured an image of a bus in the United Kingdom, and it said on the side of the bus, children have strokes too. Like, what?
No, they don't.
Like, this is normal?
No, it's not. But they're trying to make it seem normal. Just like when the CDC pushed the milestone ages, they keep pushing them back.
Yes.
That's another alarming thing.
That should tell you something is not right. There's a normalization of things. We're clearly seeing a normalization of autism.
Oh, totally.
So under the moniker of neurodiversity. In fact, there's a recent manuscript, and I believe it was in New England Journal of Medicine, proposing that for medical school, we intentionally recruit autistic young people to become doctors.
Why?
Because there are so many autistic patients, they feel that autistic doctors could relate to autistic patients better. But then they acknowledge that even though some autistic individuals are quite bright and intelligent, that it's going to be tough because it takes hours and hours of concentration. Remember, autism has a huge overlap with attention deficit problems, and that we're going to have a lot of sleepless long nights. Autistic kids don't do well with sleep disturbance, and there's going to be a lot of stress. And an autistic person is going to have to be able to look you in the eye and empathize with the patient, and they have very difficult time with eye contact. So this idea of we should normalize neurodiversity and recruit autism and bring it into medicine. Like, don't try to find a solution, just normalize it. Another one is, have you been watching the series The Chosen?
I've seen it, yes.
You've seen it? Have you seen it, Nick?
Not recently, though.
Well, Levi, who becomes Matthew, tax collector, they portray him as having autism.
But wasn't there like no autism back then?
Well, we were able to find a case, we believe, from maybe the 14th or 15th century that could have been autism. But there's nothing in the Gospels at all that would indicate that Matthew had autism. But they clearly show that he can't look at someone, he can't look him in the eye, he can't. And an autistic person will struggle.
Yeah.
And then when they try to make their point, they'll look right at you and then right again off. And typically very withdrawn. Remember, autistic individuals feel ostracized, so they have a high level of ostracism. And sadly, and as our research has led us to conclude, autism is the driver behind the transgender crisis in the United States.
Yeah, talk about that connection, because I think that's really important.
Yeah, so what appears to be the case is there's actually a few studies now that estimate, it's about 40-50% of transgender individuals are actually autistic, right? So what appears to be the case is so some of these children, young children, underage, they are autistic, right? So they are very vulnerable to, advice from their doctor, et cetera. And so what happens in some of these so-called gender-affirming care clinics is they pump them full of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, right? 40% of transgender individuals are taking those, right? And these are linked to about 40-50% increased risks of homicidal behavior. So they have that, and then they're taking these synthetic hormones, which alters the psychological profiles of these individuals. And so you have all of this combined, and then lastly, they go and get surgery at some of these clinics. Again, absolutely terrible, irreversible, increases homicide risk, suicide risk, and all-cause mortality. And so they just funneled into this system that was extremely broken. And, this has got to stop, right? This is bad.
And doctors and hospitals have been complicit in this. And I tell you, as a former professor of medicine, I am horrified that blue ribbon institutions like Harvard has a division of transgender medicine. We never vetted this. We never had grand rounds on this. The safety of this and the medical ethics of this have never been examined. It's been taken so far, for instance, in Canada, that parents will be criminalized, prosecuted, and jailed if they attempt to block their child going down this transgender journey.
It's escalated so quickly. My question is, why would these, renowned institutions like Harvard do something like that? What is your theory behind that?
What ethical doctor, nurse, or administrator would ever be a part of it? I could never be a part of it. Remember, we take a Hippocratic oath that says, above all, do no harm. These are impressionable, vulnerable, autistic children who need counseling. They don't need drugs, puberty blockers, hormones, and surgery. That doesn't cure their autistic problems they're having with dating and with gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely heinous, but something has gone wrong in the minds of doctors and hospitals to do this. I know there's revenue generated. So under the Obama administration, it was guaranteed that all the gender surgery and hormones was going to be covered by insurance or by Medicare, Medicaid. Okay, so I know there's service line revenue. But listen to this. Ken Paxton, our Attorney General in Texas, and his wife, Angela, is wonderful, and I know them, saw this. They believed it was so heinous. They were right. I assisted in an expert review for them. And ultimately, we got transgender medicine care surgery for the youth banned in the state of Texas, right? We thought the problem was solved. Well, guess what? At my alma mater, UT Southwestern, the doctors violated the ban, and they still did transgender medicine on children. They violated the law. They felt so compelled to do this that now Paxton is having to sue the doctors.
Which is crazy.
Which is absolutely nuts. And, it's heinous. The puberty blockers, a lot of people don't know this. The most commonly used one is called Lupron, something we use for prostate cancer. Do you know one shot of Lupron, let's say in a prepubertal child, like a 10-year-old boy, one shot of Lupron permanently impairs that boy's intellectual development. He will never develop a full IQ.
Are you serious?
Never.
Do you think the parents know this when they're giving this to their kids?
They can't possibly know. The children can't know that they're impairing their intellectual development in doing this. Do you know these surgeries, these mastectomies, and when the breasts are taken off, we're not talking about, like for breast cancer, we're talking about scraping every single, gram of breast tissue, and the lymphatics are changed. They don't drain correctly. They leak. They get infected. There's contractures. The poor girls are bent over here.
Yeah, because we're not supposed to mess with the body that we were given and designed.
They're not supposed to mess with God's creation. You got it.
They're supposed to cut something off.
Right. And so you know what? The complication rates and repeat surgery rates are 30 and 40%. Down below, it's worse. You can't imagine.
I've heard some horrible stories.
The lead surgery done on the boys is something called a inversion penile vaginoplasty. You know what this is? The penis is cut open long ways, it's cored out, and then it's stuffed back into the pelvis as a tube. It doesn't drain urine correctly, it stinks, it leaks, it doesn't act as a sexual organ. It's completely heinous.
It's butchering your body.
It's butchering. It should be completely outlawed.
Yeah.
It could be completely outlawed. And many of us would say, listen, people can make their sexual choices and sexual preferences. If we go back to the Romans, there's examples of homosexuality and Sodom and Gomorrah, right? There's all these biblical references. People can make their choices. But the bottom line is the children should be sacrosanct. A child should never be touched. Remember, a boy doesn't become a man mentally until they go through puberty. They can't possibly know. A girl doesn't become a woman. And so one of the leading authors in this area is Miriam Grossman. She's probably one of the most published child psychiatrists in the world. And she publishes a great book. It's called Lost in Transnation. And what she says is that, listen, gender affirmation is a good thing. A young parent, when you have a little baby girl, you should be affirming that she's a girl. Affirm this, and so she knows she's going to grow up to be a woman like her mother. A little boy, to affirm that he's a boy. So gender affirmation is a good thing. Do it early, because when the kids leave your presence and they go off to school, as you know, they are inundated with pornographic material nowadays, and they are enormously susceptible to being seduced down this perverse transgender path.
That is just so crazy. And we, as parents, we have to be vigilant. I completely agree. Do you believe that there will be a compound effect through the generations by affecting the DNA? Let's say two people get the mRNA shot and they have a child. Or do you think it can at least stop with that parent? Are we going to see effects down the line, you think? Because that's my concern.
It appears we are just now identifying signals of transgenerational harm. So I'm not talking about transgender anymore. I'm talking about through generations, right? So what's happened now is, according to CDC data, if you look at it, starting right after the mass vaccination of childbearing age women in early 2021, there's a statistically significant inflection point, right? So birth rates infant mortality rates are steadily going down for 30 years. 2021 hits, mass vaccination, boom, it shoots right up. It hasn't gone down since. It's 2025.
That's the death of babies.
Yeah, and babies. So babies in 2025 are now dying at 77% excess. Even Mississippi just declared a state of emergency over it.
Really?
Wait, talk about that.
Mothers aren't taking the shots anymore.
No, they're not. It appears some of this genetic material appears to integrate into their body and possibly pass to offspring.
So it's a legacy effect probably. Most people took the shots in 2021.
That's my concern, is that how there could be effects through the generations. Because it seems that all of this stuff is compounding, There's more than just these vaccines,
But where is the alarm from our public health agencies? Let me give you another statistic, which is...
There's no alarm. It's like, everything's great,
Let me give you another statistic. This was so alarming. 2021 will go down as probably one of the worst years for mortality of all time. And that's when the vaccines were rolled out. Of those who took the vaccine, the majority took them in 2021. That's when a lot of terrible things happened. In 2021... We reported, the National Center for Health Statistics reported record maternal mortality. Women delivering a baby and then dying within a year.
Really?
Yes. Now, this shouldn't happen. This was stunning. In the women who died, thousands of American women died after delivering a baby in 2021, which is erased 40 years of progress in modern obstetrics. Of those who died within a year, 20% of them died of cancer.
That's horrible.
When was the last time you heard of a young, healthy woman having a baby and dying of cancer?
Not until recently, but I hear about it a lot now.
Oh, no.
There's been so many
Really?
women that are getting cancer now when they're pregnant. I never heard of it until
You're kidding me.
post-COVID. A lot of women getting breast cancer and having to figure out how to carry their child, how to get treatment. Oh, yeah. But I never heard about it until post-COVID.
I didn't know of a single clinical anecdote until you just said that.
And it's from me seeing it online, women sharing their stories. And it's like horrible because you can't imagine. I mean, having a baby is a lot on a person, but to have cancer. And so it makes you wonder, but I never made that connection.
Well, the CDC holds the vaccine records. They should be an open data set for us to do research. There should be an urgent call to merge the CDC vaccine administration records with the cancer registries.
They don't do that?
No.
Why?
I mean, there should be, listen, the CDC has an autism network. They've got tens of thousands of kids with autism carefully studied in this CDC network. They need to merge the vaccine administration records of these kids with their autism records. These are urgent things that need to happen now. They should have happened on day one. If I was HHS secretary, they would have happened at day one. These are simple priorities. The CDC is holding the vaccine administration records. They hold autism registries, cancer registries, cardiovascular registries, all-cause mortality. They are keeping the vaccine records secret in the United States and not allowing them to be opened up for research.
Why do you think that is?
Because the CDC must know that there are harms from these vaccines. And if we do research, we're able to put two and two together and fully tell the story of the safety concerns of vaccines. The CDC, because they subscribe to vaccine religion, they know that work in this area is going to lead to vaccine hesitancy. Now, vaccine hesitancy in the medical literature is considered its own disease.
No.
Yes. So there is an Oxford vaccine hesitancy scale.
There's a scale?
Yes.
Oh my.
That's how far this religion has gone. So you would be a subject in research. You would fill out a survey, and then you would be declared to have a disease, and your disease, Rebecca, would be vaccine hesitancy.
Oh my, that is ridiculous.
That's how far this has gone.
That is crazy. Well, yeah, because they want, and you know, one of the things you talked about in the cycle is you said, if you wrap, you know, what you see in the history of vaccines is there's a fear. And the way that you get people to do something is one of the greatest ways to control the masses is through fear. And it's manipulative.
Yes.
And you've seen for yourselves how fear has been used on the masses to push an agenda that's actually harmful and causes more harm than good. Because you made a good point, Nick, with a lot of these vaccines, it's like you have to weigh the pros and cons. And it's like, is this really the risk of getting like an MMR? Is it worth it compared to contracting measles?
Yes.
And for a lot of people, it's not worth that risk. But you're never going to be told that if you go to the pediatrician.
Right. But I want to be fair. Listen, I'm a doctor. I'm board certified. I hold human life in my hands. Someone like my brother-in-law, who's had a lot of medical problems, he's had his spleen removed. Mm-hmm. If you've had your spleen removed, you are a setup for deadly meningococcal, pneumococcal, and Haemophilus influenza infections, for sure. In fact, I've had patients who've had their spleens taken out, and it's just these infections have ravaged their bodies. I feel very strongly in that case that he should take these vaccines.
The problem is that a lot of times when you go to these pediatricians, they push it on all kids.
That's the thing. It's a one-size-fits-all.
Why is that? Are they trained that way?
It's just we're told there's a schedule, follow it. And now it's come out in these Senate hearings, I don't know if you saw this, that doctors, the reimbursement from insurance companies or even from federal sources is tied to the percent vaccinated in their practice. So now they're financially incentivized to push the vaccines because the doctors are working to get their bonuses.
Well, I could talk for a whole other hour, but we have to go because of time. I want to thank you both for what you guys do and keep fighting the good fight. And let's continue to educate the masses to make informed decisions, and let's expose the false religions of vaccines, right? For anyone that wants to get the book, where can they go?
Go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, wherever you get books. Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, Reality is meticulously cited It's probably worth 3 credit hours in graduate school. It's a great read of history, but it's not a boring medical history book. It's written with a story. It's got a beginning, a middle, and end. It's got real characters. You get to know them, and you'll have a much greater understanding, a fair, balanced understanding, because there is a reality here. And what I want people to know is in medicine, there are always risks and benefits. Above all, we should do no harm. And very importantly, everyone should have their own medical autonomy. They should be able to make their decisions. Parents should be able to make decisions for their children without any fear of reprisal or consequences. I mean, it should be a completely free decision on vaccines. And I think you're doing so much to bring this to light.
Well, thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.